Welcome back to the Kidmin Huddle. I am here with my very first guest on the podcast because I've never had a guest on here before. Pastor Adam Sculnick, welcome.
Hi, I'm your first guest ever.
You are. I've never brought a guest on here before, and I didn't even tell you that.
I'm I'm honored and shocked.
Yeah. Nope, I've never brought on. It's just been everyone just gets my opinion. So now they get to hear from somebody different and much taller.
Much taller, that's true, yeah. Though with Zoom and other, intellectual screen apps, we're the same height.
We
And
are.
so to
Crazy.
the people watching,
Yeah. Okay, so I know who you are. I think you're fabulous. But tell our friends, who are you and why did I bring you as my very first guest on the podcast?
because no one, I don't know. So my name is Adam. You said that already. I am a senior pastor of a church in Michigan, West Michigan, Second Christian Reformed Church. We're a humble group of like 130, 150, depending on which Sunday you're talking about. I've lived here 6 months or so. I used to live in South Florida. That's where my family started. Have two teenage boys that are awesome. They're 16, they're twins, and my daughter Delilah is 10. My wife puts up with me. It's amazing. For 17 years. In the process of all of that, um, I find time for the only real hobby that I have, which is writing. And that's where I get all my thoughts out. And so on the fun journey of figuring out what to write about and what to do, I've sort of landed on God leading me towards helping men lead their families, lead their sons, lead in church. It's like a passion of mine from before I knew what that meant. And so that's like my MO. Equip men to be active in their sons' lives, active with their wives, active in their churches, and seek Jesus as like the core of their life versus, I don't know, jobs or nice cars or whatever the world tells you that you're supposed to have as a man.
Yeah. So I know you've given talks and all sorts of things on getting guys specifically involved in children's ministry, since that's kind of what we focus on in this podcast. So maybe just briefly touch on why is it so important to have a male, whether it's the dad in the home or a male figure in church, in the spiritual life of a child, specifically
Yeah.
boys. Girls need guys figures too. Well, that's a different conversation. So today, just really we're talking about boys.
Yeah. So I'm a nerd about statistics. So I'll share two. The first one, the average North American dad spends 8 hours at most actively engaged with their son on a weekly basis. 8 hours. So if you're mathing, that's 1/5 of the time that they spend actively engaged working, assuming they have a full-time job. That's awful, like really, really awful. And that 8 hours includes dinner, like it includes mealtime. That's terrible. That's a horrible statistic. And then, so that's like in the home. And then for the church, the average church has 3 times the number of female volunteers as male volunteers. And so the average church loses 2 in every 3 boys year over year as they get older. So it starts in like second, third grade. And then as the boys and girls start to identify as boys, girls versus child, like there's an age where you start to notice that there's a difference between you and the other people in the room. From that moment, which is roughly second or third grade, every year you lose 2 of every 3 boys. So if you look at, and this is an average, so not everybody's going to feel this, but if you look at the average Sunday school, first grade, it's usually boys, girls. Second grade, it's boys, girls. Third grade, it's girls and then some boys. Fourth grade, it's mostly girls, fewer boys. Fifth grade, it's mostly the same girls and then even fewer boys. And then in middle school, it's ridiculous. It just drops like drastically from there. And that's bad. That's real bad. But if you look at those statistics, it seems like they parallel each other. So if you have more men, you would theoretically also have the boys staying. And then there's other really interesting things, I think, like the divorce rates are so super high right now. At Christian homes and secular homes alike. It's almost the same number of divorces year over year. And so a lot of boys, and I'm a victim of, not a victim is the wrong word. I'm an experiencer of this. I was raised by a single woman. My mom did an awesome job. And when I was a kid, she used to say, I do the dad job and the mom job, which is cute, but it's actually not accurate. I love my mom. We've had this conversation, but you can't do the dad job and the mom job. You can do double mom, but you can't do dad and mom because dads are equipped differently than moms are equipped. So if that's the case for most of the families in the United States, like more people are lacking a solid father than have a solid father, then we need men in the church who have two thoughts. The first is they recognize the only real solid father is God. And that if they're modeling Christ like we're supposed to, then we need to be present for the boys in the congregation. And so that's my goal, is to equip men to feel those two feels.
Yeah. No, and it's there's a thing going on online recently about, like mamas, we do the cooking, typically the cooking and the cleaning, and we're not the fun ones. Like I feel all my other mamas are going to agree. We're not the fun ones. We're not the ones that the kids go to roughhouse. We're the ones who meet the child's needs. And when they're sick, that's who they want. They want the cuddles for moms. But like biologically, mentally, all of those hardwired by God, man, they go to the dads for certain things. The dads are like made for roughhousing, and those kids need it. So in the church, men, if you are listening, you are needed in children's ministry. It's not just a woman's job. It takes all of us because children need both the female and the male example. But we know scripturally who's the head of the house? The male. And the dad specifically is called to lead his family. And I don't think anybody is going to disagree that on average, in America, that is not happening. So, man, I wish someone would maybe write a book about about like how to intentionally parent, like intentional fatherhood. Sounds like a really good book idea. Adam, you have any
You
thoughts
know,
on
it
that?
really does. Someone ought to do. Oh, I did.
What? Do you like that segue?
That was the best. Oh my gosh. You're hysterical.
Thanks. Okay, so Adam, just what, like has it even been 2 weeks where it officially was out?
No.
Okay.
February 1 was the launch date.
So a week ago, which
The
was
recording
also
video.
coincidentally the twins' 16th birthday.
It is, yeah. So in the dedication on the first couple of pages, I dedicate, I got to turn there because I don't want to quote it wrong. I dedicate everything I write to my wife because she's my wife. She's the other half of me.
Whose
So
name is also Amber, so she gets some
yeah,
cool factors in my
yeah,
book.
right. I'm a fan of Amber's. But then I also said I dedicate it to my sons who came into this world and made me a father. Thank you both for being an inspiration for this book. I'm so proud of the men you're growing up to be. And so I chose the release date to be their birthday. Not because it's a present to them, just because I thought it was really special that that was the day I became a dad. And so, yeah, 16 years of wisdom. And it's not, I should caveat, this is not like, I'm not writing this as the expert in dadding. This was an exploration in how to do my job as a parent better that I sort of just documented.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I don't do all of the things in this book well. I've just settled biblically on the idea that these are the things that we should be doing. And so it's sort of this isn't like an implicit thing. I don't say this in the book, but it's sort of a challenge from me to other men to step into the calling of God to be a dad, uh,
Mhm.
and do it with me. And so
So
that's what.
maybe because we don't want to give them everything away, but maybe just give us a couple of key points on what they're going to find in intentional fatherhood. We know it's that challenge to do that, the necessity of why dads you need to be intentionally shepherding your kids, but maybe give us some teasers so that they go out and must have the book.
Yeah. So okay, this is going to sound weird because I'm not going to talk about the book for a minute, but I promise you it makes sense. The way that Jesus taught is no longer the way that education happens in or outside the church. Like his model of teaching, there was a rabbinic tradition where the rabbi, the teacher, would just kind of do what he does, and the disciples, the students, the whatevers, would follow the teacher. And they'd get dirty. They were so close to him that his like dust from his shoes would hit their feet. So they would like literally like huddle like little penguins, like following around. And so that's why the disciples are always present when Jesus is teaching. And that's why in a lot of his larger, more complicated teachings, like the parables that are weird, he does the parable and then there's this almost like a sidebar and he looks at the disciples and he goes, did that make sense? And they're like, no. And he goes, and then he says something like, you have little faith or whatever. And then he unpacks it for them. And the reason that happens is because he's teaching them to be teachers. So the parallel for fatherhood, so that's why the book makes sense. The parallel is what men are supposed to do is be the lead discipler of their children. That's the primary function. But we have this weird culture in America, especially, where we send our kids for everything. I'm not knocking public school, so I'm going to use that as an example, but I don't hear that. I'm not like raging against the machine, but like we send our kids to public school to learn what they need to learn. We send our kids to church to learn what they need to learn. We send our kids to, football camps to learn what they need, but men are just not engaged. It's easier to cut a check or slide a card or whatever to pay an annual fee, if there is one, or to pay, your tithe or whatever it is to each of the organizations so that your kid is educated. And it doesn't need to be that way.
And
then
biblically wasn't set up that way.
right,
Education, faith transformation, it all happened from mom and dad, mainly dad, but moms too.
Moms and dads, there's two things you have to sort of learn. So like boys learn from mom what to expect, and I don't want this to sound like burdensome, but like what to expect from a godly wife. You should be able to look at mom and go, that's how I should look for a wife to treat me when I'm marrying. So the mom should be modeling godly motherhood and godly wifehood. Not a word.
If it's not a word, it is now. Yeah.
It is now. I'm using it. But okay, in Ephesians, there's the famous like women do this, men do this, kids do this thing at the end of chapter 5 and the beginning of 6. The fulcrum of that whole story is the father. It starts with wives. Wives, submit to your husbands as unto the Lord. And everyone gets all like, whoa, he said submit. Misogyny. Ugh. But like, even the original audience wouldn't have cared about that. Women already didn't have rights then. Paul was actually saying, you should submit. But then he turns and he looks at men and he goes, men, you're Christ in this situation, which is not easier. Christ literally dies. And that's what Paul says, give your life for the church to make her more beautiful. So like the actual call on men is your wife should be better because you're married to her. You should improve her. She should be holy and blameless before God as a result of your husbanding. And then it switches to children, but it says fathers, not parents, fathers don't belabor or don't conflate, or depending on the translation you use, don't, aggravate your children. So like men are supposed to be strong, or I use the lion and the lamb analogy. They're supposed to be lions for women and children, but lambs with women and children. So strong for them, gentle with them. And if men aren't doing that, then women who are natural problem solvers, everybody says men like to solve problems, but women are better at it. Women will naturally fill that void. So if your husband is not teaching your children about Jesus, the wife will naturally step into that. But then because we have like beta husbands, that's maybe an aggressive way to say that,
but it's true.
Not present husbands.
Content to sit back and let the wives do it.
Right. They're content to let the school teach them education, the church teach them God. And so if the wife is like, we're going to go to church with or without you, if that's an option, a lot of men are like, is that an option? I like fishing. Or like, my bed's warm, or like whatever. And so that's just generationally what's happened. And I know I was supposed to talk about the book. The book is a tool to re-engage that process. So it's a book for men Women can read it too. So there's a discussion at the beginning about how if you're a single mom or if you're a mom of boys, this will help also, but it's written to men. So there's like a caveat at the beginning. So when I use like male pronouns, you're not like, this isn't for me. It can be, but the audience is men. The book is for men, but at the end of every chapter, there are engagement questions that are meant to be done with your child. So it's both like head knowledge, but then also like hand application stuff. So it's meant to put the man back into action or to like press the unpause button on their life. And it takes them through like a full discipleship gamut. So it begins with, what is the gospel? What is discipleship? I have some stories about boys engaging in each of the lessons. So at the end of every chapter, there's like in a real world, how would this work itself out on like the schoolyard kind of thing. And then after that, the gospel section, which is 8 chapters, to like the meat of the book. Then it transitioned into age brackets. So there's a chapter on middle school. It's called Middle School Intentionally, where it's like, what are the things as a man that you should be discipling your son in these years? And then it transitions to high school, does the same thing. It transitions to college, and it tackles both the college years, but then also college. So there's 2 chapters. My son during his years in college, but then also like, how do I help my son with college? Do I need to send him to a Christian college? Don't I need to send him to a Christian? Like, how do I help him with that? And then there's a piece on marriage. How do I prepare him to be a good husband to his wife? And then in the back, there's just some appendix stuff, some like additional resources, websites I love, books that I like, games that I enjoy using for discipleship with my family. And then because the model that I used for unpacking the gospel is from a historic confession of the church, there's an appendix on that confession so that I didn't have to try and explain 1,000 times that it wasn't my idea. I'm not a fan of taking credit for other people's works.
That's good. I feel like there's a word for that, and it's a no-no.
Yeah,
Literary,
something like copyright infringement or something, or plagiarism. I don't know.
you know. So the book is called Intentional Fatherhood. So like how important is that whole intentional aspect in parenting with the goal of raising godly men?
So if God is our father and we're meant to model him, like we're image bearers, so we model him. God talks constantly about generational impact, like constantly. It's not just about parenting. Everything that he does, he mentions the overflow of that decision on the next generation or the next generation. Like a couple of times, just in the 10 Commandments, he says, to those who love me, this generation, or to those who hate me, to this many generations. Like he's constantly like eyes forward. That is not an accident, and that shouldn't be overlooked. And so, like me personally, my oldest children, I've said this already, are 16. I pray for their kids. Just in case no one picked up on that, they're not married and they don't have illegitimate children, but they will be married with kids one day. And my responsibility is to raise them to be able to raise their kids. So I have to have an eye for that. In the same way that like in the Psalms, you hear about the metaphor of like raising your children, they're like a quiver of arrows.
Mhm.
Well, you don't just pay attention to the arrow, you pay attention to where the arrow is going to go. Like if that's my target is a well-rounded man who can husband a wife and raise children, that's my target. So I got to think about that. You can't passively like get there. You're not going to passively get there. You have to actively get there, and that takes thinking through and being engaged and being intentional, which is why I called it what I called it. Passive fatherhood isn't, and it's also less fun. Like if I sat on the couch while my kids hung out, like that might feel like I'm getting the better end of the deal, but like you miss the fun part of fatherhood. So
Plus your role, like that's your job. You are commanded to lead your kids, to parent your kids, to disciple them to grow up to be godly men and women. So yeah. So give us one tip. Let's say that we have a dad listening that is not currently intentionally parenting. So obviously it's going to be, the overall like go read Adam's book and you've got a tutorial. But give us one thing that these dads could start right now. Maybe this is a whole new concept to them that they need to be intentionally shepherding their kids. So one thing that they can and should do to start right now.
yeah, so modeling is easier than you think it is. It really just means drawing attention to an action you're taking. And so I'm going to use my daughter as an example because I just love this example, but it works for all children. My daughter and I have a time every night called prayers and hairs. It's just because it rhymes. Basically, she likes texture. She loves like slime and she loves Velcro. I don't understand it. She doesn't have like, she just likes things that are weird. So, and growing up, she always wanted to play with my wife's hair or my hair, and she just likes doing that stuff. So at bedtime, she was always really kind of spastic. She didn't want to lay down. She didn't want to settle. And that's like the perfect time to draw someone's attention to the Lord because they're about to close their eyes. So you can review your day. You can give thanks for what was good. You can give thanks for what was bad because you can give thanks in all circumstances. Like you can do everything unless they're not focused. So we have this prayers and hairs time. So she lays down, I tuck her in, I read a story. Sometimes it's a Bible story or from a devotional. Sometimes it's just straight from the Bible, but that's harder because the Bible's not kid engaging. And so rather than, hey, read the Bible with your kid, which doesn't always work, we do this. She puts her head down, I put my head down, and she puts her hand on my head. She likes the feel of it. It keeps her distracted, and we pray. She prays, and then I affirm her prayers before God. God doesn't need my permission to hear my daughter, but it does two things. It shows the child that I'm praying for them. I'll also bring up things in my prayers that she didn't bring up that night, but has previously, which shows her that I care about her in more space than just the present. And then I'm modeling for her what prayer looks like. So she prays, I pray, then we stop. So it's prayers and hairs. So her prayers are sometimes very short, but what I've noticed is at the beginning, her prayer was almost always the same. It was like, help me get a good night's sleep, help me have fun in school tomorrow, something like that. It was super small. Now she starts lumping in things that she observed in the house. Like right now, one of my sons is coughing really bad. The allergies is just like punching him because the snow has melted and the grass has been rediscovered. So she prayed that his cough would go away, and she prayed for one of her teachers who is I forget what his deal is. Something's happening in his family, and she prayed for him. So like things are starting to connect in her mind. This is the time when I do that. But that's super easy. And I didn't teach her new ways to pray or correct her prayers or say, babe, you have to intercede for other people, or like none of the things that like as adults we're taught about prayer. I just pray over her with her in a moment that's just for the two of us. And it's already bedtime. And so I'm showing the child, I care about you enough to stop what I'm doing and come put you to bed. And I care about you enough that the only person who has ultimate control over your destiny is worth talking to on your behalf. So take a minute. This is the tip, I guess. Take a minute with your kids and create your own prayers and hairs time. Like figure out if your kid doesn't have a tactile thing or you don't want people touching you or whatever, you don't have to do it the way I
Or you
just said,
don't have hair.
or you don't have hair, but like that evening prayer in general, like model saying grace at the dinner table, like, but the more times your kid can see you praying, the better off your child will be, both in prayer and in life. And it's an easy thing to model. So if you don't know where to start, presumably if you're a Christian already, you're praying, let them see you do it. And bonus points if they see you do it for them.
Mhm. It's almost like God knew that like we should be living it out and our kids should be seeing it like that. It's just part of our everyday life. Like not this intentional, okay, I'm going to sit down and teach you how to play. It's like, man, it's like God knew that and maybe put this whole big passage in the command to mom and dad that your walk, you're supposed to be passing this on as you go. So if you're not catching my gist here, this is the Shema I learned to say correctly because I'd been pronouncing it with the Kentucky accent of Shema all my life. Then Adam corrected me. Um, but we are supposed to do this as we go. So everything isn't this weird, awkward, all right, children, it's time to sit down and I'm going to teach you all the things you need to know about God. Um, More is caught than what is taught.
Oh yeah.
So my daughter, I'm old school and I have a CD player in the kitchen. and I always have music on. And I go in themes, like it's the CD that just doesn't stop. So right now I'm listening to the Casting Crowns remix where they had other people do their songs, and it's fabulous. But for a while it was on Phil Wickham, and I got to go to the Phil Wickham concert, and I took my daughter about a year ago. So she was about that 5, early 6 range, and she knew the songs. And she's like, "Mommy, this is the one that you play in your kitchen." And so she could sing along a little bit, not because I sat down and said, "Okay, we're going to practice for the concert you're going to go to," because she hears it. Same thing with, we were on the porch like last summer, and she's like, "Oh, that's one of the kitchen songs," because she hears it. It's just part of our everyday life. So it's the same thing with prayer. If they hear you pray, even if it's awkward and you're bumbling through, man, they see that it's important to you. So they want it to be important to them. How do they get stronger at prayer? By doing it, by hearing it, Bible reading, all these things. So love that so much, because we should be living it out. And bonus tip, so tip 1.2, they can't catch on to what you don't have. So
Yep.
moms, dads, church leaders, impress this on your parents. If moms and dads don't have an active relationship with God, if they're not living it, they can't pass it on. So this, as a ministry leader that's listening to this, this is where you come in and ministering to mom and dad and leading. This is that family discipleship conversation that you hear me having with my new role at Renew Nation. You have to be leading mom and dad. So they need to have a vibrant faith, or they can't pass on a faith. They need resources. Not all parents know what they're supposed to do as a believer. My husband's kind of had this revelation. We're in that like weird age group. I'm 36, and he's 40. So a lot of the people in this generation, it was kind of that generation that checked out from church. And now that they're having kids, they're wanting to go back to church. But there's that disconnect in that they don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. As
No
a
idea.
believer, they don't know how to study their Bible or how to pray or do these things if they weren't that child that stayed active and deeply involved in church. Because that also, during like the youth group years for me, not the church I went to, because there wasn't a youth group, but a lot of those youth groups were the like, let's just get them to Jesus and have fun, and miss the whole grounding. So ministry leaders, you might need to be training dads on how to be a strong Christian. Don't assume that they know that. This goes to whole bunch of other podcasts you guys should listen to about knowing your families and all of that. So there we go. There's a lot for you to think about, whether you're a ministry
Yeah.
leader or a parent right now. But the key word, like the first word in Adam's new book title, intentional. We need to be intentional.
Yep. Can I add to that?
Yeah,
So in the introduction, it talks about it. So the introduction is just a message to parents, essentially. But also it talks about how this can be a tool for small group Bible study at church. And I know that typically children's ministry leaders focus on children because it's in the title, but you cannot, there's 168 hours in a week. You get them for one. You
maybe.
can't. Maybe, right? Depending on how long your pastor goes for, you get them for an hour. Like if they're there on time, if they don't get
If
picked up
they're
early.
there, if there's no sports or sleepovers or ball
Yeah.
games or
So you're not going to win. That's bad math. I'm not good at math, and that's clear to me. You get 168th of their time. Come on. So children's ministry leadership has to include ministry to parents. And a lot of churches don't have a family ministry. And so it's just assumed that somebody's doing it. But because churches, especially in North America, have compartmentalized, you've got people for kids and people for adults, but the family is sort of ignored because all the individual pieces are covered. So, like, do you have a family ministry leader? No, because I handle kids and pastor whoever handles adults, and then some pastor so and so handles the college kids, and we split too much. So, what would it look like to create a Bible study for the parents of the children that you minister to and say, hey, I recognize this is hard. I want to help. And I don't want to help by handing you a pamphlet or
that you're
like
not going to read.
that you're not going to read. I was a children's director for a long time before I took the role that I have now. I don't think that was my title, but whatever. I led the children's ministry every Sunday. And I used to be really, really big on sending kids home with stuff to continue the lesson. But my call to action was not do this and come home. My call to action for the kids was always teach your parents, force them to talk with you. And then at pickup, parents would come in and I equipped another leader to do announcements so that I could get, so somebody else would say, so and so your mom's here to get you, so that I had like 15 seconds before the kid shows up to
Hmm.
greet the parent where I could say, hey, this is what I gave him. Ask him about it.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you to know about it. I'm telling you to ask him about it because I told him to teach you. So, like, the next logical step of that is teach you to teach him. But if I'm being paid to get tons of stuff for them, then I skip the adult part. That doesn't work. And so we have this perpetual cycle of parents sending their kids to other places. And I heard a quote once, if you send your kid to Rome for education, don't be surprised if you have little Romans. I'm not saying that like your church is Rome or that public school is Rome, but if you want your children to represent the values that you have to teach them the values because most people don't share your values, even if you think they do.
Yeah. Yeah. And we
So,
talk about this a lot at Renew a Nation. Honestly, I've been there 6 months and I would redo 17 years worth of ministry, knowing what I've learned in the last 6 months. And I did children's ministry well. I was grounding my kids. I was giving them a faith. I wrote every single lesson because I wanted a certain level of theological depth that I didn't find in other places in my budget and, a whole lot of things. So I did children's ministry well. And I don't say that in a prideful way. Like it was good. It was solid. It was all the right things, but I didn't do family ministry as well as it should be. And I missed out. So I was teaching them at church and they were getting the gospel and they were getting grounded, but I wasn't doing the right kind of things to make mom and dad as effective as they're commanded to be. So that's
yes,
a whole, yeah,
you made your 1 hour phenomenal,
yes,
but then they had 167 hours to
yeah,
forget what you taught them.
yeah.
And
And
that's the primary gap that I'm hoping to sort of bridge with this
yeah,
book is like, what if, like, I get it, you go to work and they go to school, but like with the couple hours between coming home from school and work and bedtime, what are you doing to be intentional with your son? Or like with your Saturday, what are you doing? Like if he's in a sport, are you just on the sideline? That's enough if you're watching. That's like really neat. That's the difference in intentionality and being passive. Like if I've never been a coaching type because I wasn't a sports kid. And so I don't know the rules well enough to actively coach. A lot of dads are like that. They love to watch a sport, but they don't know enough to be the coach. So like if
mhm,
I drop my kid off at football practice, am I on my phone in my car or am I at the gate going, yeah, that matters. You're modeling. You care about them.
yeah,
It's not parenting is not, it is the hardest, easy thing you'll ever do. The ideas are very easy. The practical working out of it is very hard, but the ideas are not. They're not hard. Just be engaged and that's faith and that's bedtime and that's dinner and it's just about what you choose to prioritize. And I feel like the priority thing is what we could do better to teach parents. What should you prioritize?
and the
Um,
Bible even laid it out for us.
yeah, your
God, and
God,
then
your
for men,
spouse, your children.
wife, kids.
Yeah, God, spouse, children,
It's like
and
he thought of everything.
I teach it in four from the pulpit at church here. I teach it in four: God, spouse, children, work. And you always get men in the room that squirm. They're like, "How is work after all of that? I have to work to support those people." Yes, that is true. Your work provides the income for those people, but not to support them. The actual support they need must be built on a foundation. There's a lot of trades in the town that I live in that my church is comprised of a lot of people who work with their hands. So the whole idea of like a foundation before you build trusses and things is a
Mhm.
really easy metaphor for the guys in this building. But even if you're not a tradesman, you can't build the roof and then the concrete floor. You can't, it doesn't work. So you might earn money, which is important. But if you're not focusing on God, then you're not loving your wife well enough. You just aren't. Because if you've put her above God, then she's filling a role she can't, and so she's always letting you down. And if you flip those around, but then your kids are underneath work, then they feel undervalued. So you have to sort of organize things, God, spouse, children, work, otherwise things will fall apart somewhere.
Mhm.
And so earn money, fine. Like if you've got a 60-hour week job, that means you have to be more intentional with the time that you have when you're not home. So all of the natural excuses guys tend to have are just kind of a wash. I only get a couple hours a week on a Saturday to squeeze it all in. Cool. Prioritize.
Yep.
Squeeze in Jesus. Well, how do I squeeze in Jesus and then my wife and then my kids? Do it at the same time.
Because if
Squeeze.
you have that order the way that God command, it's gonna fall in place because God gave it to us for a reason. He didn't put anything unimportant in the Bible.
Nope.
So where do we go and find Intentional Fatherhood, the book?
Intentional Fatherhood is self-published. I decided not to try to go the traditional publishing route this time. I have another book that I went publisher with, and so that one's a little more easy to find. You can go to any bookstore. I wanted to do this directly so that I had a little more control over being able to give it away. And so I was able to keep the price low by doing it on Amazon. So you go to Amazon, um, and you can get it on Kindle. You can get it on in paperback, and then hardcover comes out, I don't know, a week or so from now.
Well, and if you looked it up today on Amazon, what did I see? There
Yeah,
was
Kindle is free today
yeah.
and tomorrow.
See, there we go, friends. And this is it's like a $10 paperback book. So get it. And if you like to write in your books like I do when they're important, it's a $10 investment. For real friends, go and buy Intentional Fatherhood. So I'm going to spell his last name for you just in case you guys, I mean, Skulnick's not, it's not like Smith. So that way you get it right. It's Sculnick, Adam Sculnick, Intentional Fatherhood. You can get it in all the forms in Amazon. And really get this for the dads in your life. If you are a dad, children's ministers, maybe this is a resource that you want to pass out. You want to do a small group thing, but make sure you're doing it with the encouragement of just how eternally important it is for dads to intentionally father their kids. So, Adam, thank you for your heart for this. Thank you for the resource. And hey, thanks for being my very first guest on the Kidmin
Hey,
Huddle.
thanks for having me. This is fun. Anytime I get to talk to you, we're friends outside of me being a guest on her show. So it's sort of fun to watch her do her thing. And the fact that I get to be part of it instead of watching has been really neat. So thanks for blessing me with getting to be part of your show. Can I
Absolutely.
call her show? Is that still culturally appropriate?
Sure. I mean, it's my thing. I can call it whatever I want.
I don't know.
But I always end it with the exact same thing. Every episode, I don't know if anyone has listened to everyone and they notice it, but every episode is remember, Kidmin leaders, what you do matters. So I'm going to switch it up. And Adam, I'm going to let you give that charge to the dads who are listening today to end today's show.
I am touched. Men, dads, remember what you do matters.